Welcome to the Transformational Podcast. We are so glad you are back with us. We love this time, this opportunity to tell you what God's doing in our life, to tell you how God's been faithful in our life, even in the past, as well as the present. And so I'm Robert. My brother Chris there is the pastor from Paradise. I'm the Marine from Maryland. And we are so happy that you're joining us today. Chris, we did a little bit of talking beforehand, and it sounds like you've got a lot going on over on your side of the planet. Good things from what I understand, but still a lot going on. If you want to give us a little bit of an insight into the world of the pastor from Paradise.
Well, yeah, I mean, good stuff. School's begun, praise God, the boys are full force in that, which is brings some rhythm to the family, which is nice. But the building process is full steam ahead here at the church. We're in search of a student pastor and some other teammates for the team just here at the church as it's growing. We had one of our largest, it's our largest fall attendance in the history of the church this past Sunday morning, which was pretty exciting. We had a great night of prayer and praise, a worship night that night, last weekend, Sunday night, where we prayed for the schools and the teachers. And it was just a powerful week. So amazing things that God is doing. At the same time, there's just the details and the hurry and scurry of ministry. We've got fall content that I've been working on. So I literally feel like the gas pedal has been stuck at the floor for the last little bit. But it's exciting. Like I don't want it to ever be a complaint because it's one of those things that God's working. I just sometimes I'm going, all right, God, but I need you to send some teammates to help with some of the busyness. So.
Yeah, it is funny, Chris, because, if you look back at the apostles, right, a lot of them were both, tent makers, so to say. They had a daytime job and a full-time apostle job. And so I couldn't imagine doing that and trying to lead a church back in the day, trying to live and, make your own money and do that. But then, even more crazy is when you have a team that you're expecting, like I guess you could say, the number of people you know that you need to like actually row a boat, and you're down a few people, that just it makes folks have to work a little bit harder. And so we'll ask the folks in on our podcast to pray that God brings you the youth pastor that you need and any of the other teammates you need, and that maybe he can turn down, as I like to say, turn down the volume a little bit. No need to be at at 11. We can bring it down to a steady 8. How about that?
Deal with that, man.
Yeah. So for me, this week started off at more like a 6 or 7. It's never quiet. It's never boring in my job, but at least this week we have 2 of us now. And so with my boss out on travel, I was able to catch up on a lot of things and even look forward a little bit, which is really important when you're in a role like this, is to get out in front of everybody, because when it's kind of funny when you're, hopefully I'm gonna just give a leadership lesson for those out in the world. If you're find yourself to be the top, if you're changing tomorrow's events, tomorrow's schedules, or even if you're changing next week's schedules, the trickle down effect isn't like a little ripple in a pond. It's like you threw a giant boulder in the pond, because for you're like, I just changed it next week. But for everyone else, you talk about, it just wrecks schedules. I just hit my microphone. It wrecks schedules. And so getting out ahead is what we do. And that's part of what I had a chance to do this last week. And then, this weekend, Chris, it's funny. It's most folks, they have the week to, they work and then they come home and they take a little bit of opportunity here to take care of this and that around the house. Well, I do all that from Saturday morning to Sunday evening. And so I find myself, out working on that kind of stuff. But this week it was, Chris, I wasn't at 11 like you. So it was actually nice to have a week of like 7 or 8 and be able to do a little bit of work, but not feel like I was going to lose my ever-living mind. Next week will be fun, but it was nice for the Lord to kind of give me a little bit of a break. we talked a little bit before we started, and we were talking about a little bit about pastors and their calling at a kind of a generic high level. And one of the things that it brought up when you were called out to Odessa, which is interesting, Chris, because when somebody told me you were called out to Odessa, I'm in Texas, right? I'm in a Texan. The first thing that came to mind was, where's that? And then yeah, and I'll tell you, the first time I visited you, and we'll go back to like from a little bit earlier than this, but I don't remember if you remember when I visited you. I actually rode in at night,
Yeah, it's the best time
and
to
so I
come to
didn't really
Odessa.
see anything. I drove in. Yep. Well, the next morning when we woke up, I don't know if I ever told you this. I walk outside, I look around, and I'm like, oh man, I'm back in Iraq. Like, this place is in the desert. And so it was very reminiscent of one of my couple of my deployments, as far as like the terrain and the climate and that kind of stuff. But I was curious. You gave me a little bit of an insight as we were talking. How'd you get called to Odessa? And then when you were called, what was your kind of your initial feeling? Did you feel like you were all in, all out, trepidation? Like, what did that look like? You're calling out to Odessa.
So it's very interesting. Just when I think back to this process, because um, as we've been looking for student pastors, what's interesting is a lot of people don't understand Grace Fellowship, the anomaly that it is. They
Mm-hmm.
look on a map and they see Paradise, Texas. There's less than 400 people there. So in their mind, when they see that, they're like, "There's no way this isn't just a little 30-person country church. That would be normal for a town our size, right? Nothing
Yep.
wrong with that either. That's great for a town like that. And so it's not belittling it, but for people who are looking for a ministry job in a church like ours, it's hard to imagine that there's a church out here that runs 1,800 to 2,000 people on a weekend. When you look at where it is on the map, we're 40 minutes from Metroplex and from the city, if you will, 35 to 40 minutes. And so for some
Yeah.
people, I think it's really hard for them to imagine, and yet we're looking for high caliber leaders. So as I've been processing that and been frustrated with it, I just thought back through just some times in my journey where God called me to go somewhere where I didn't fully understand, and Odessa was one of those. Um,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, now what's interesting is I was at Prestonwood, fantastic church, great people. Uh, you
No, that
know,
was a great church.
learned a lot, grew a lot. I knew that probably wasn't where I'd be forever, but that was okay. There was nothing wrong with that. I wasn't necessarily eager to leave, but just knew that just the way I was wired was just not as traditional as some would be, and that's once again not right or wrong, just different. And so I just kind of had that deal of going, but God has me here, and He's doing great ministry here, and God's teaching me that it doesn't matter the way I'm wired. If I just do things the way He leads me to do them, it doesn't matter what environment. The gospel is the gospel, right? So it was really good
Yeah.
for me, and I grew a lot there. Um, but when I lived there, I lived on Odessa Drive in Plano, Texas, on Odessa
Okay.
Drive. Now, when I moved on to Odessa Drive, I didn't tell you this. The corner that was two houses down from me was Lufkin, Texas, or Lufkin Drive and Odessa Drive.
Okay.
Okay, I lived almost at the corner of two places I wasn't interested in living, and I only say Lufkin because they were our rivals growing up, right?
That's right. Yeah,
but
I
I,
know. I knew exactly why.
but
Yeah.
I said out loud, just joking, man, Odessa Drive, and this is as close to Odessa as I ever want to live. Now, Robert, I have no reason to say that. Like, other
Yeah.
than I saw Friday Night Lights, the movie, and was like, man, that place, there's not much out there. I'm not sure I want to get, and I just think
Yeah.
it was way out there. Nothing was close to it. And all I could think of was desert. And what
And
I
it
thought
was.
of, yeah, what I thought of
Yep.
was not far off. Um,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
a little over 2 years into it, probably about 2.5 years into it there at Plano, God was stirring my heart and just saying, hey, there's a step coming. And Julie and I weren't actively looking. I didn't even have a resume out. But I got a phone call over Thanksgiving of 2013.
Okay.
And I was actually in that condition. I still remember it was so vivid because I look at my
Yeah.
phone. I was outside next to the smoker where Dad was fixing, and
Yeah.
I look at my phone and I see Odessa, Texas, in a number, and I literally said out loud because I instantly thought of what I'd said about Odessa when everyone would go there. I literally said out loud, "You've got to be kidding me!" And just out of curiosity, I went ahead and answered it. I didn't know if it was going to be a
A
scam call or what.
telemarketer.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
probably there's a part of me I was hoping it would be, but it was not a telemarketer. It was the pastor of the church out there, and
Hmm.
he kind of tells me what's going on there, and Robert, I just was like, yeah, okay, well, tell you what, I'll pray about it, and you know what, next week let's talk.
Which is
So
code for, yeah, we're not going to talk about that again.
well, the only thing is I couldn't not think about it. So I talked to Julie about it. I was like, man, we just need to
Yeah.
we just need to we just need to pray about it. I'm not saying it's anything. I don't really,
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know that this is what we're supposed to do. It's pretty random. And we weren't looking for it. One of the things a mentor said to me before is that if you don't go looking for it, and someone's reaching out to you, you should at least have a conversation just to ask the Spirit to help you discern if that's God opening a door, right? And
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
so we talked about it. Now this was November, all right. So I talked to them throughout December, like in almost an entire month, and they're trying to find a time to get us out there. We've gone back and forth on phone calls, just answering questions, asking questions, and they wanted to get us out there to take a look. Um, it wasn't going to work out just with the way our time off was scheduled. But then I got in one of our meetings, our campus pastor said, "Hey, I really need one of our pastors to switch which weekend they're gone for Christmas because the way that the coverage works."
Yeah,
And I was like, "Oh gosh!" I knew instantly. Hey, that is God. I literally because
that's me.
I kind of said, God, it just doesn't seem like it's working out. I just don't. Yeah, unless you make a way for this to happen, then I just don't. I don't see how this is going to work. And then that comes up, and you're like, okay, yeah.
Yep.
Let me talk to my wife, Julie, and I'll let you know. Sure enough, we switched it. Now, here's what's crazy. This can be a fun story, right? So we went
Yeah, yeah.
that Friday and Saturday and celebrated Christmas with whatever
Okay.
side of the family we were supposed to celebrate with at that time. I can't remember which side it was. Oh, it was with Julie's family because we left the boy. We left Barrett with them, but Brock was still an infant, so we take him to the airport and our flight's at like 6:30 ish. So we get there about 4:30, between 4:30 and 5. Go in, and literally as we walk through security, our flight gets delayed. And so I reach out and say, "Hey, our flight's been delayed. We're gonna be a little bit later." And they said, "No worries, whatever." Well, it keeps getting delayed. We ended up going and eating dinner there. Mind you, I've got an infant with me in a stroller,
Yeah,
right? And so
yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, this is airport is the last place you want to be stuck with a baby. And so we
I know,
go
right?
eat,
Kids
and
expiring.
Robert, it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And about when it got to midnight, as far as what time it was supposed to take off, I just said, "All right, God, here's the deal." And most of the flights there were a lot of flights getting canceled, and I just kind of said a little prayer to God. I was like, God, if this flight gets canceled, I will take it as you telling me that I'm not supposed to go to Odessa. Now, I later regretted that prayer when I got on the plane at 1:30 in the morning. Robert, we left at
What?
1:30 in the morning, got there at
How did they
2:30.
even staff that? That's
I
crazy.
don't even know. Got there at 2:30. I didn't go to sleep till about 3:30, and then I had to get up to go through the interview process about 6:30, so I could get dressed and ready by 7:15. So Robert, I'm walking through that next day a zombie. 3 hours of sleep.
I'm sure.
Not
Yeah.
even good sleep at that because I have an infant, right? I already mentioned that. And so we go through the day, but I had this moment in service where I'm standing there, and I was really just going, God, really, like, this is it? Is this what it is? And I felt like He said, if this church was in Fort Worth, Texas, you would have already said yes.
Hmm.
And He said, how much does location matter to you if this is where I'm working? And it brought me back to that Henry Blackaby
Hmm.
statement of I think it was called Discovering God, or that's not what it's called. forgot the name of the study by Henry Black. It'd be something like Discovering God, but I don't feel like that's it. But one of the statements that people quote often from him is find where find where God is working and go get involved. Get involved there.
Yeah, I loved that statement because that was one of the things that was like, I guess you could say, the things that was a foundational in my life. I think it's experiencing God. Is that the one you're talking about?
yes, experiencing God. I was
Yeah.
like, man, I'm not. It's not the right title. So that was had that moment, and I went through the interview process. We stayed through Monday because we got there on Sunday and came back Monday night. And Julie had asked me on the plane, well, what did you think? I said, I don't know. I just have to pray about it. I need to process it. Well, she asked me again when we get in the car and we're driving to go pick up Barrett from the grandparents. She said, what did you think? I was like, I don't know. I just hadn't had time to really process it. I don't know.
Yeah.
And but I turned around and said, well, what do you think? She said, I don't know. I need to pray about it. I think we're going to move. Literally that fast. And I was like, well, that was a quick prayer and quick process. Okay. But I will say this. I do believe that Julie can sense those things very well. She always has.
Chris, you used to sit in bed and think for like 15 minutes about what you were going to wear for the day.
Well, yeah,
so
you got to
not
process,
shocked at
man.
all.
Yes.
Yeah, not shocked at all that you need to process a major life change.
Good strategy always helps, right?
Yeah.
So that being said, I pray about it. Now, in the meantime, I'm praying about it. We're talking to him. This is January. I've got stuff coming up in February for the student ministry there that I needed to see through. And I happened to read a blog from a young lady who had been an intern of mine who'd gone into international missions. And
okay,
she'd
cool.
written a blog about the power of yes. And that she had this opportunity to go into this mission field, this mission opportunity, but nothing was really guaranteed. If there was a lack of anything or an abundance of anything, it was an abundance of uncertainty, right? Other than that, It was just, we don't have answers. We don't know how it's going to work out. We just know that this is an opportunity. And so she felt as if God told her to do it. And she goes through the power of yes, that because she was willing to go to a place there was uncertainty, but she just knew that's where God was calling. She starts listing the things that she got to see God do. And the way that it impacted lives and changed family, and God's changing families. And it was the power of yes, and just the willingness to say yes to what God wanted him to do. Well, Robert, one of my prayers in ministry has always been, God, please let me be in a place where we're getting to see lives changed. I really don't want to do ministry if all it is collecting a paycheck. I'm just not interested in that kind of ministry. I want to be a part of ministry where we're seeing your light break through darkness. Like, that's what I want to see. And so it kind of brought me back to that mindset of going, all right, so if God is asking you to go to what he's doing out here in Odessa, is where it's located, is location the thing that's going to keep you from experiencing God's power. Now, here's what's also crazy. Like, all the other things going through my head. I now have 2 kids. We're going as far as we've ever been away from any family. And they're young kids. So, these days, babysitter solutions are harder than ever before. And yet, I feel as if that's what God's leading us to do, asking us to do. But I wasn't sure. And so that night I prayed about it. And I just felt like God was saying, hey, will you give me your yes? And that night I was like, all right, God.
It's funny.
Do it.
Yeah, it's funny, Chris. You said that you don't want to just collect a paycheck, right? And I'd be willing to bet that anybody who goes into ministry, or the majority of the folks who go into ministry, that is absolutely not their intention when they step into it. Because a lot of them want to go and see what God do. Now, sometimes they get burdened down by the plus 12, for weeks on end, and so they burn out. Some of them, God gives them an opportunity, or shows them an opportunity, or leads them in a direction, but because they chose not to say yes, they end up not going where God is working and where God actually wants them. And so in doing that, I think sometimes we find ourselves in positions, some folks find themselves in positions where they're like, I don't really see God working around me. And so you know, there's two parts to that. So it's equal, and I want to just talk about it for just 2 seconds. Is if you find yourself where you don't see God, working around you, you start praying and ask God to show you what He's doing around you. That's a part one, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you start to pray that and you start to do that, and you get that random phone call from Odessa, and for me, Chris, it was a random email that was from one of my best friends in college. He said, "Hey, I'm at test pilot school." And this was 2 days after some random person had said, "Have you ever thought about going to test pilot school?" No, I'd never thought about it. And no, I never thought I could. And then I had God, in basically a 2 day order, bring it up twice. And then He brought it up a third time 2 weeks later. Okay. So my point being is, I could have said no because it would have actually been easier to say no. That would have been actually that would have been the right thing to say in a military, career perspective. But
Yeah.
that's not what it was. And so I think if you're not seeing God move around you, I'd ask to say, God, show me. And
Yeah.
then when He shows you, then jump in on it, say yes, be power
Yeah.
of yes. And then if God says, hey, it's because actually I kind of want you to do this. And it looks a lot like Odessa, which has its own beauty and own charm. So I'm not hating on Odessa. But certainly if you're from the piney woods, it's not the first place you're looking on the planet to go move unless you're just really tired of trees.
Yeah.
So what were some things that were really preventing you from wanting to go there or from, getting there? And then what was the thing that like closed the deal that took you from I'm uncertain to yes? Was it just simply Julie in the car saying, I think we're moving? Or what was it when you processed it? What brought you across that little valley? And then it's making me think of that passage in Acts we were talking about earlier. So I want to kind of
Yeah. I
take
can
it
see
from
that.
there and then
Yeah.
jump into Acts if we could.
Yeah. So some of the things that I think of the preventers is simply resources. I was at a church that had great resources and
Yeah.
there's great benefits to raising my family there. They do a
Yeah.
really good job taking care of their staff and would have loved to be able to, from the career side, right? Career versus calling. Career side, that
Yeah.
this didn't make sense. This was not a good career move. I was at the big church. I was in a place where we were seeing God move. So it didn't make total sense there. Um, and then the other part is, I think sometimes we hold very tightly to our dream rather
Mm.
than open our hands to God's desire. Um, because you know, what if God's design for you and His desire for you is greater than your dream, and yet you're protecting your dream because you're like, no, I need to set up my life here and dig deep roots here because I don't want to have to move a lot because moving's annoying and you have to start over with friends and we'd already done that several times. We're ready to be done doing that. And you know what? This place has great benefits and this place has great retirement and
Yeah. Yeah.
but not a lot of that's guaranteed. And not only that, we have family close and now we have family who can help take care of the kids. I want my kids to grow up around their grandparents. Like I had all of the reasons that honestly anyone has when
Yeah.
it comes to
Normal.
making this kind of decision.
Yep.
And it was just
Mm-hmm.
one of those things of saying, and really, it's really kind of what I think our parents taught us a long time ago is, are you willing to go wherever God leads you? And I would say this, I'm so grateful for parents who encouraged us to go where God led us. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
try to hold us back. I've met many people who told their kids they couldn't go into ministry because there was no money in ministry. I
Yep.
had a person in my life that was very close to me tell me that they said you shouldn't go in. What are you going to do after ministry to make money? Literally, they were. It was all about that, and so I get it. But mom and dad always taught us that hey, where God leads,
Mm-hmm.
or where God guides, He provides, and you just have to begin to trust Him. And so that said, there was a lot of things. I think the thing that pushed me over was literally that um, that blog that's just the power of yes. And then that next week, I actually in Bible study. This was pre-scheduled. We worked together across the multiple campuses what we were teaching at Wednesday night Bible study, and I just happened to be teaching something I'd never taught before, just because it'd never come up at that point in my ministry, and that's from Acts 8, and starting with verse 26. It's the story of a guy named Philip and the Ethiopian. So I'll summarize some of it, but basically, Philip has been teaching and preaching with there in Samaria, and with some other guys, Peter and Saul are preaching there. But he's been preaching there in Samaria, and God's been doing some great things. And he has a pretty successful ministry of preaching there in Samaria. But then verse 26, an angel of the Lord says to him, go down to the desert that runs from Jerusalem to Gaza. So now notice, that's all he told him to do.
Yep.
Right? He just says, go down to this place. Go down to the wilderness. And it says, so he started out, right? Right. That's what he's telling him to do.
Go down where there is literally nothing. There's actually no people there. There's no people there, right? He's a preacher learning to, looking to convert people. And he's saying, go to the desert.
Yeah.
Anyway,
leave where
crazy.
all the people are and go to the wilderness, to the desert where no one is. And yet it says the very next verse, so he started out. And he goes and he meets the treasurer of Ethiopia, a eunuch under great authority, the candidate, the queen of Ethiopia. The eunuch had gone to Jerusalem to worship, now was returning. Seated in his carriage, he was reading out loud from the book of the prophet Isaiah. Now, let me just give some clarity there. They believed in many gods, and they wanted to try to keep all the gods happy. And so they didn't know the one true God. It was very customary for them to make trips or provisions to worship the different gods, because their hope was to keep all the gods happy, and so
they didn't want to offend anybody,
right? As a representative of Ethiopia to try to keep the God of Israel happy, and so Philip meets him. It says the Holy Spirit told him to go over and walk along beside the carriage. He would have been in a big caravan as a representative of Ethiopian queen. And so this would have been a lot of pomp and circumstance, just the way they traveled back then. He walks alongside. Here's the man reading from the Old Testament scripture of Isaiah. And he just asked him, do you understand what you're reading? And the man replied, how can I, unless someone instructs me, unless someone explains it to me? And so he invited Philip up into the carriage, right? And he gets in the carriage. And the passage of scripture he was reading was from Isaiah, where it says he was led like a sheep to be slaughtered, and as a lamb is silent before the shearers. He did not open his mouth. He was humiliated, received no justice. Who can speak his descendants? For his life was taken from earth. And so the eunuch asked Philip, was he talking about himself or someone else? And so Philip uses that verse to explain the good news of Jesus to him. And we know that he received it because as they're going along, he sees a thing of water, a body of water, and says, hey, there's water. What prevents me from being baptized? And so they stop the caravan. They go to the side of the water. They baptize the Ethiopian. And it says, when they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord, I'm going to read this part, verse 39. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord snatched Philip away. Okay, don't read past that. That is just one of those, are you serious? What did that look like? But and the eunuch never saw him again.
What did the Ethiopian think? That's what I've always wondered. I mean, you're Philip, and you're like, I'm used to this. Miracles. I teletransport. The Ethiopian's like, wait, where'd he go?
Where'd he go? Yeah, that is bananas. But here's what's crazy. Many scholars believe that was what initially took the gospel of Christ to the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
Because Philip was willing to say, I don't understand. I don't understand it. I don't get it. This doesn't make sense. I've got a very successful ministry right here. But God, if you tell me to go do this, I'm going to go do this. He goes. God does what he intended to do with them. And really, we don't even fully, we can't fully comprehend the kind of impact that likely was made because he was willing to go to a place that didn't have people, didn't make sense, but God had a purpose and a place and an appointed time. So I guess my reason that I want us to look at this is how often in our life do we miss out on what God wants to do because we reserve our yes for what makes sense, what's logical, what we can rationalize and use logic, what is comfortable for us, what fits our dream, what fits, what we desire most. I mean, what do we miss out on because we reserve our yes, and rather than putting our yes on the table and just say, yes, Lord, whatever you want me to do, I'm in.
Yeah, it makes me think if I were pastoring this up a little bit, churching this up, if I was Pastor Chris for a second, I think you might even say it is how often do we miss God's best when we reserve our yes?
Well, there you go.
And
There you
that's
go. That'll
that's the
preach.
that's the real yeah. I mean, that's the real question, and that's part of the
Yeah.
reason why when we were talking a little bit about this week and the crazy part of it, and you're looking for a youth pastor, and just the kind of walking through some of the challenges that are surrounding, looking for a youth pastor in Paradise, Texas, which it is on a map. Does makes no sense that you guys would be calling somebody to a church that runs, hundreds of kids through it. And so if if you're a youth pastor and you see that, you're like, that seems a little bit fishy. Like maybe they're inflating their numbers. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
a jobs report or something. But in this case, um, in this case, the fact is that it may not even make sense to what kind of like what your life plan was.
Yeah.
It may be the fact that God's using it as a stepping stone, or He's using it as a you have no idea what I have in store for you this best, because you're holding out for whatever your plan is or whatever your thing is, and it's quite frankly it's applicable kind of across the spectrum. I mean, I look back at my personal career. There's nothing about going to test pilot school. While it seems on the face of it, everybody's like, you're complaining about going. No, I'm not complaining about going to test pilot school. What I'm telling you is at that moment in time, it made no sense. There's
Yeah.
nothing that made sense about that. At
Yeah.
that moment in time, when Chris got called to Odessa and somebody called him next to the cooker in 2013, Thanksgiving, nothing about that made sense. Nothing about it kind of led that thing. But the fact was, is God was calling him. And Chris, just like Philip, when Philip said, the angel says, hey, I want you to leave this area of population and I want you to go to the desert. Nothing about that made sense. And it was the willingness to say yes. And frankly, Chris, I can remember where I was when I was standing in the service in Temple Baptist in New Bern, North Carolina. And I was still struggling 2 months after God had called me to put my application in for test pilot school
Yeah.
because I was really struggling with it and kind of pushing back. And there was a bunch of reasons why I shouldn't, all the things you're talking about. And I finally said, all right, Lord, if you will, and I go, bam, 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 then I will, bam, bam, bam. And dumb of me, right? I should have just said, I'm all in. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not the way to do it. Just, I'm going to tell myself. But what was interesting, Chris, is in that moment, he met me where I was because he
Yeah.
also does meet us where we are often. And he said, okay, and I was like, that's it? Just okay? And it was clear, man. It was okay. Well, he did. He hit 1, 2, and 3. I put my application in and I moved on to the next thing. And so I've been a little bit less demanding in my yes.
Yeah.
as I recognize that God's best is in our yes. And so
So,
I guess go ahead. Before we
so
wrap up, maybe you want to wrap up. I don't know. What do you
no,
want to do?
I want to hit on something real quick because
Yeah.
maybe it's not a job. Like I'll say this, going to Odessa was not necessarily something I wanted to do, but I would never not go there again because of what
Oh
God did
man,
when
for
we were out
sure.
there. What we got to
Yeah.
see God do, like it was some of the most fruitful years of ministry ever. Some of the toughest, but some of the greatest. Some of our greatest friends. Just the life change we got to see. It was amazing, amazing years of
Yeah.
ministry. And so I cherish my years out there because of what God did. But I wouldn't have that to celebrate had I
Yeah.
not said
And
yes to
not to
God.
get like us too far off topic, as I recall, like your very first week or two out there, you had your stuff stolen. And
Oh yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. It wasn't long, and someone
from
stole my tools, Jax.
yeah. So from like a opposition perspective, that didn't make any sense.
Mm,
Um, and when I got to we didn't have a house moving here. I don't know if you remember that story. Maybe we'll talk about that one sometime. But we didn't have a house when we moved up here. to go to test pilot school, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
was like down to the last second, but the Lord showed us exactly where He wanted us, and that's a really cool story. I don't know if we've told it, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah,
Well,
I think
but
it
but
may
I
not
want
be
to,
a big move. It may
yeah,
be just in your area, and that's really what I was trying to get at earlier. With
yeah.
if you don't see God
What
moving around you, ask Him.
and maybe the reason you're not seeing is because you hadn't said yes to the little things, yes to
Yeah,
getting involved at church, serving somewhere. You know,
yeah,
a lot of times we don't see God moving in our own lives because we're not doing the little things of spending time with Him, saying yes to saying, "All right, I'm going to be consistent." You know, saying yes to giving back to God. We don't see God moving in our finances. We don't have stories to tell about how God showed up in a big way. Well, maybe it's because you haven't trusted Him in a big way
yeah. I
with the
know.
little
Yep.
things. You know, maybe it's that you should be leading a small group or leading in student ministry or kids ministry. Or the reality is that if you don't say yes to the little things, then God doesn't get to show up in big ways, right?
Yeah,
Literally, these are the little things that He invites us into. He doesn't say you have to, but He's saying, "Man, I created you for more than just waking up, going to work, coming home, watching TV, going to bed, and starting over. I created you for so much more." And there's little
yeah.
yeses that He invites us to every day, I believe.
Yeah, Chris, I wanted to tell the story of some friends that I have that have come to our small group in the past because I think it's relevant only in the sense that they all have, a lot of them are having littles right now. And, they're on one or two or whatever. And for the most part, by and large, all of these small group friends of mine, they are involved in saying yes to the Lord in some form or fashion, whether it's working in the youth group at church, or whether it's working in the nursery because that's where they go, or whether it's hosting people who don't know Christ over, or hosting even just friends, fellowship friends, right? And they don't let the busyness of small children, and trust me, there's the busyness of small children. I mean, you figured that out in the airport.
Yeah,
Prevent them from saying yes to the Lord. They actually invite folks into that messy middle, as I like to call it. And I don't mind a little messy, we call it hospitality. I think it's great. I think it offers an opportunity for folks to see kind of how we live. And that's one of the things when we were hosting our small group, I wanted folks to, and hopefully people get that same sense in this podcast. I want people to realize that, hey man, there's mess in all of us. There's mess even in, Chris and I and our day in and day out. And so, but the hard attitude is in the eyes are up on him and focused on him. And so, a little bit like that, like Philip, be willing to follow where the Lord leads. If it's a big move, or if it's just something that God has been, like Chris said, if you can't get it out of your mind, like you can't stop thinking about it, I'm going to go on a limb here and say that's probably something you need to explore.
yeah.
Well, Chris, last words. It's about that time.
Man, I just come back to this. Uh, if you'll give God your yes, you'll get to see God move in ways you never imagined. Don't reserve your yes, or you'll miss out on His best.
Amen.